Thanks for tuning into this presentation. You're about to either watch a video or listen to audio recorded at the Grassroots Radio Conference in 2012 at the Independent Media Center in Urbana-Champaign. Please enjoy.
This is Ezra Shine, and he has been very patient for this during this conference, but this morning he was like, Mom, I've had it. That's it. You're not giving me to anybody. You're not going anywhere. So I said, okay, you can be part of the plenary. And he's silenced at that point. He stopped crying. So he's happy. I'm happy. I wanted to welcome you all to this Saturday of Grassroots Radio Conference. We go until noon tomorrow. As we have opened, thank you. I will have a voice by the end of this. We've invited all of you to come here to be part of a conversation about the history and future of community radio. And a lot of the conversations we've had so far have been focused on the history. Joe Torres did a great job of talking about some of the deep roots when it comes to media policy and where we got to now, and some of the racial dynamics in the creation of our U.S. media system. So sometimes when we talk about going back to the good old days when we had diverse newspapers, it wasn't the good old days for everyone. And I think Joe Torres helped to kind of illustrate that we've got a way to go forward, not a reclaiming of the past, so to speak. Nan Rubin talked in the opening plenary about some of the kind of phases of community radio history. And I think we have representatives from all of those phases here. Maybe there isn't someone from the very first Pacifica station, but with the rest of them, we have reps. So that's really exciting. We're kind of pulling the knowledge from all the different parts of the movement for this conversation. So what we wanted to do this morning is to actually hold a conversation with you all, which is why we're in here around the tables, and you have some pens and papers, because we're going to work together on the topic of the future of community radio. And so I wanted to start off by summarizing some of what Nan said and adding to it, and then for us to work in groups around 4 questions. And what we'll do is I'll kind of help lead you through those 4 questions. And if you all could have a scribe and a spokesperson, we'll do some report backs at the end. We're going to go until 10 o'clock. So each of you is just going to take a piece of this conversation and go deeper. I have a volunteer request. I need a person with good handwriting who can write big letters and help me put some things on the wall. Good handwriting. Yeah, people are tired. Some people are tired in the room, I can tell. Yeah, please. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to shout out a couple of words if you can describe on that.
Just one word per page, is that what
Yeah.
you're looking for?
So Nan kind of opened the conversation, and I'm going to quiz y'all to see if you remember how she ended her conversation. She talked about 3 areas that we needed to focus on in talking about the future of community radio. Anyone remember what one of those areas was? Okay, think way back. I know it was everybody was twittering and looking on Facebook. Yep, sustainability. So that's one of the conversations we're going to have. Go ahead and put the word sustainability. And that has to do with issues of, right now we are looking at having hundreds of new stations come online. We're in the process of seeing new NCE, non-commercial educational faux power stations come online. And meanwhile, a lot of our stations are also struggling. So here at RFU, I know you all probably say, wow, the IMC, they got their shit together. Look at this. RFU is really struggling right now. We're going through some big changes. RFU's been a separate working group for a long time. Prometheus Radio helped us get it online in 2005, and it was going strong for a while. But it's had lagging membership. We can't get our tower up to the full height. Actually, we're going to do that this fall. But, you know, we've struggled with getting enough listeners. We maxed out on broadband, so we weren't able to stream online. And, you know, and so the IMC is absorbing that working group into the whole IMC, and we're restructuring its governance as we speak. And I know when I visited Gainesville, the LPFM station, there's sharing time with the religious station, and they don't even have a studio. They don't have a studio. You know, they're struggling also to have memberships. I know a lot of the Pacifica stations have struggled over conflict in the stations. You know, this is a time when community radio is facing some really difficult challenges when it comes to sustainability. So it's one of the things we want to talk about. Does anyone remember another thing that Nan mentioned as a topic for the future of community radio? Somebody took notes. What's that? Access. Can you say more?
Access?
Yeah? Access to what?
That was, well, this is when Ann and Deidre and Betty were discussing with those two. I know Betty's discussed that more, so about being a challenge for people to have access.
Yeah, and one of the things they were talking about is the difference between kind of access and participation. And so the changing nature of, you know, build it and we will come is not necessarily a viable model at this point. I know PEG stations learned that a while ago. I think community radio is learning that now. And so one of the words that was brought up in that plenary was, how do we build stations that are truly participatory? So that's one of the words we'll put down. How do we build stations that are truly participatory, and how do we grow our stations into stations that are participatory? And so definitely looking at access and then going beyond access to that bigger piece. Anyone else remember?
Collaborations.
Collaborations was a big thing. So collaboration, and this came up in a couple of the different sessions I was in terms of both with the new LPFMs and old is, you know, at this point, I would say that the model of the shock jock DJ sitting in the studio, broadcasting whatever he or she thinks is what everyone wants to hear, whether it's commercial music that they love or that age is kind of over. And so I think one of the things we're looking for is instead of the individual, people are used to having many-to-many communication, and radio is really a one-to-many communication if you just look at the studio and what's happening at the studio. If you look at the station and station governance and curation, it still is a kind of many-to-many communication. And so I would add to it governance, if we could write down governance, like the structure of our stations, how they're governed, collective curation, and also collaboration both within the station but also without. So really looking at our community media centers, because that's really what radio stations are, as collaborative spaces for lots of different groups to get involved. We also have seen, so I talk to funders a lot, and the number one question I get is, well, isn't radio dead? I mean, why should we invest in radio? It's a, you know, we're on to the next thing. Internet is everything. And I think that there's kind of two pieces to that. One is that they're wrong. Like, every single media had this new media emerge, and, you know, TV was going to kill radio, but it didn't. The internet has certain things that it can do, but it's also not a collective curation of a space, oftentimes. It's, and, you know, go ahead and set up an internet radio channel. Who's going to listen? Who's your audience? How do you make that audience? There's something about a local broadcast that generates, you know, where your neighbors are talking to neighbors and there's a shared community there. So, so on the one hand, they're wrong, right? On the other hand, they have a point. And I think that point is that there's a lot of different technologies out there, and that if community radio doesn't take advantage of those technologies, so that there's feedback. We close the feedback loop with listeners. So you can't just broadcast something nobody's listening to, that there's really, you can see how engaged the community is in your programming. There's opportunities with community wireless to use antennas as community Wi-Fi nodes, which is what we do here at RFU. And there's, people can do automation online using airtime. I think that was a session that happened yesterday. But there's, you can start to do some curation online and make it easy for people to participate. So the second piece is technological innovation that we'd like to discuss with you. Are there other, not only in the plenaries, but also in the sessions, are there other kind of categories of things that have come up that are areas of conversation for the future of community radio? Norm?
I think sort of taking off with that very last thing that you just said, the whole notion of cross-platform distribution, being able to send out the same information simultaneously through many different media in order to reach listeners wherever they're at. And this is particularly important if you're in places, where you don't have high-speed internet, but you can get there with community radio, and so on. And I think that Democracy Now! Being one model of that, where they have the TV and the radio and the internet blast of headlines and the Spanish and the English and so on. But sort of ways that we can do that in our stations simply and routinely, rather than it having to be a big production each time.
So let's call that distro, and it can include high-tech ways of doing that as well as low-tech. Anything else? Any other categories? Susan Parenti.
Well, I've had conversations about, we have preventative healthcare systems, preventative radio, because when you talk about community radio, we have some extremely functional community radio that makes me sick, like the amount of just monolithic religious seizing of the community. There is correctly a lot of community radio where you can drive for 300 miles and get nothing but God and anti-immigration, etc. So by opening up access to radio, we've also need to prevent, maybe that sounds too strong, but I find it difficult because community radio is functional in certain populations, and I don't want to hear those messages, and I'd like us to be able to think that radio could fight other kinds of radio.
So what would the word be to summarize that? I mean, one way of thinking of it is with the low power FM opportunity. So it's really hard to revoke licenses of folks. There is, you can kind of go in and try to take over a station. You can try to buy a station if it's commercial. But with the low power FM opportunity, we have a contest. It's a competition. And the religious groups are well organized to take what they hope to be the majority of those new LPFM. So one of the parts of the future of community radio could simply be the LPFM competition and looking at how do we win over the religious, but it's not so much religious, it's the evangelical networks, and it's the hate speech mongers and the folks who want to play Rush Limbaugh.
Well, that's where, I'm just questioning on the level of language, because when you talk about community radio, that is allowing hate speech and evangelical, and so I'm finding that term a little bit inappropriate, because there's a time, again, I am from Occupy, and I'm very concerned about that trajectory that we started and how radio can help us continue that. We had a 4-hour on WEFT Occupy station program that kind of died with our being confused this summer. So there is a community of ideas out there that's not necessarily a location community that needs to be helped. I don't know how to give the categorization of that. I'm not talking about revoking. Either it's true community, meaning a community of the wide variety that we see, so that we can have fruitful conflicts with people, or we need a different kind of community.
So would it be a kind of what or when is community question?
Yes?
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, I say what or when, because sometimes community is a time and not just a group. Yes?
I think one of the main responsibilities as a community radio station would be effective shepherding and stewardship of the airwaves. And I think that's what's going to give us the upper leg to make a dent in what's happening out there, is by if we're mindful and we become effective stewards and effective shepherds of what we're doing. And I, you know, if we're mindful that way, I think we have more chance of success.
So let's just write that as stewards of a commons, so that, because that's a different outlook than some programmers have on community radio. So let's look at a couple other hands. Go ahead, Sabrina, and then Ken.
John, how would you make a distinction between that and sustainability?
Okay, so actually, I'm not going to take questions. We're just getting topics, and actually, you all are going to discuss in groups. So if you want to have that discussion, we can pair you up. Ken?
So I wasn't here in the opening committee, but Joe Torres's remarks last night reminded me of at least two things. So the one category in terms of with sustainability is the issue of jobs and work. It seems to me that we have to begin to address whatever work that we do here to the crisis in employment. But I also found kind of missing in his talk this link to communication, media workers, union, the kind of labor connection. And what is our relationship? This broad category of work and jobs.
Okay.
I think that's
Let's talk about
a key issue. I guess the other is what's
So economics and or that. Okay, jobs and labor. Got it. Okay.
I mean, I normally
So what's your second? No more conversation. Just a second, because we're going to get to the conversation part.
Discuss further tomorrow about diversity and right and I hate the term diversity, but differences.
Okay.
And the question of race and racial hierarchies.
Okay.
So different communities, I guess. So anyway, jobs and work.
Okay. We'll use the somewhat decayed word of diversity for what Ken is referring to. There were a few other hands. No other hands. Go ahead.
I'm going to have a hard time formulating this, but this conference has been different. This is my first one, and I've only been in community radio for a couple of years, and I kind of was driven towards community radio because I guess I wanted to be an activist, and I'm also a communicator. Like, I went to school to go to journalism, not saying that means anything at all these days, but, you know, like I find myself that the tool that I can help people with is I'm able to communicate with them with a pen, with a video camera, with whatever I have. So at this conference, there's been some things about, like, it's like they're saying, no, we don't believe in objectivity, but we're going to put another label on it. And I feel like there's no offense, but the stewardship is like, okay, so we're the ones that, I mean, I got the same kind of feeling in class. So in one of my classes, I was like, pro-citizen journalism. I believe that everybody with a pen or a video camera or whatever has the right to report and the obligation to report. And just because you're participating in a march doesn't mean you can't be documenting it and sharing that. And so, like, where is that line? Like, if we're stewardships, does that mean we're kind of up here and not within the struggle? Or are we also in the struggle and communicating and spreading the word? Like, is that what community radio is? Because that's what it was to me when I started, when I got involved in it.
So would you for just have a label on it, would citizen journalism, the questions around that, objectivity, subjectivity, involvement, would that sum up in a word or two what you're talking about?
I mean, there's some definitely discrepancies among this crowd of, like, whether or not it's acceptable to march and also report on it.
That's a really interesting conversation. So I'm going to put that down as a citizen journalism. And I'm just going to add one from Nathaniel James, who missed the bus, but he was in our, is content. Just looking at the quality of content, production of content, et cetera. So I'm going to add that. And there was one hand in the back, and then I'm going to close. Actually, there's two. Go ahead, both of you.
In Albuquerque, quote unquote, we got distracted by our contract. We had started a statewide community journalism network, and we specifically chose the term community journalism instead of citizen journalism because we didn't want to exclude undocumented voices, so just wanted to put a shout
Yep.
out for that.
Yeah, something to consider. Remember, citizen, not everyone's a citizen, so this issue. So we can discuss that in the topic. I'm going to close it, so I know you had a hand up, so I'm going to take your hand up. We're going to close and start the conversations. Go ahead.
I just want to say activism is a separate category.
Activism is a separate category?
Yeah, from community journalism. So, I mean, there's overlap there, but it can be its own category as well. Cultivate communication with different activist groups.
Yeah, I'm going to actually pair that with collaboration. So what I'd like us to do is, I'm going to shout out these. I want someone to raise their hand who feels really passionate about this aspect. And I'm going to assign that to you and your table. Y'all are going to switch around so you can actually talk about the topic you want to care about. So we're going to do a quick switch. It'll be a chaotic clown car like switch, but we'll get there. And yeah, I'm going to tuck that with collaboration. So
Go through them all real quickly.
okay. Actually, I'm not going to do that for time purposes. I appreciate the suggestion. But so what I'm going to do is call these out, assign them. People, the person assigned, I just want you to hold it up so everyone can see the things. And then we're going to do a clown car switch. We'll have light music in the background. And then we're going to go through a couple of questions together. Okay? So citizen journalism, which I also call popular journalism. Yeah? Okay. So that's going to be this table. Quality of content. Is someone particularly hot on that? Okay, can you hand that to her? Okay. Diversity, inclusion, issues of race. Okay. Can you hand that to her in the back? Okay. Jobs. Jobs. Ken. All right. Stewards of the commons. Stewards. Okay. What is community? What is community? Susan, are you stuck with your own idea? LPFM competition. How do we win? Anyone want that? Okay, next. Distribution. Cross-platform. Distribution. Where's your? What? Okay. Cool. Technological innovation, convergence of technologies, et cetera, et cetera. Over here. Okay. Oops. Governance. Issues of governance. Who's cruising for a cruising? All right. Collaboration. Community collaboration / activism, connecting with activists. Okay. Participatory. How to make stations participatory. What participatory means. Okay. Sustainability. Okay, sustainability. Okay. Awesome.
You've been watching or listening to a presentation recorded at the Grassroots Radio Conference 2012 at the Indie Media Center in Urbana, Champaign. Thanks.